Welcome to the Confidence Conversations podcast. I'm Gail from Enrichment Coaching, Clarity and Courage Coaching for Confidence, and I'm the founder and CEO, or actually I prefer Chief Enrichment Officer. I love to make a difference to those beliefs that you have about what you think you can and can't do. So the idea behind this podcast is to get the confidence conversation going, and I want to explore all the different views and opinions on confidence because there's loads out there. I'm going to be talking to lots of different people over the episodes and exploring their confidence. How do they know when it's at their strongest? How do they know when it's at their lowest? And how do they manage that? And I'll be asking them for their top tips or takeaways about how they enrich their own confidence. Now, just to be clear, these conversations won't have any fancy editing. They'll be organic and authentic, just letting the conversation flow. That said, I know I'll be curious, so there may be a hint of coaching and questioning along the way. So, let's go. Welcome to Series 1, Episode 1 of the Confidence Conversations podcast. Now, my guest on this episode is LDV from LDV Works. And when I asked her to be my first guest on the podcast, she said to me, yeah, of course, I'd be really happy to do that, but I just want to let you know that confident just isn't a word in my vocabulary. Now, as someone who is perceived as being naturally quite confident, this was so interesting for me to hear this. So naturally, I was really curious. So here we go, have a listen and do let us know what you think. And today I'm really delighted to welcome onto the podcast LDV. So LDV, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Confidence conversation, if you like. So just take a moment to just introduce yourself and tell the listeners who you are and what you do.
Oh, I feel like I was on blind date then. So I'm LDV. My real name is Lauren, but I think most people know me as LDV. And I am the founder of LDV Works, which is essentially a company focused around people development within the workplace. And then a lot of people will see as well that there's LDV Lives, which is essentially my personal life. There's a concept around living designedly, working designedly, designedly meaning intentional, purposeful, deliberate. So for me, it's kind of like that personal exploration in LDV Lives of me living designedly. And then LDV Works is how do we bring that into the workplace? How do we get people to work more designedly? Through lots of different workshops, one-to-ones, and things like that.
Awesome. So you and I have spent a lot of time talking about confidence. So it's really great to have you here. And I think we'll just go straight in and we'll see where the conversation takes us. But the first question I guess I want to ask you, and you have been on my Instagram grid, so if you've seen that, then apologies. Well, I make no apologies for repeating myself, but tell us what confidence means to you.
So I'm going to go right back to the Instagram post because it was a really interesting question when you asked me that. And I'm sure we're going to be exploring this through our conversation today. But when I really had to think about it, it was really about like kind of to believe in yourself and to have trust in others. I think it's something that really does come from inside, like it's an internal thing. I think we try to seek it externally, but I do believe that it comes from inside.
How do you get that self-trust, that self-belief? What do you do to get that for you?
Yeah, I love this. And I think it's a really strange one for me. And I kind of mentioned, we talk about this quite a lot, but I think I don't necessarily think about it. This is the challenge for me. Like when we were having this conversation, I was like, how am I going to articulate some of these things? Because I don't necessarily think about it. But there are definitely moments where I think, oh God, I don't know if I can do that, or like the inner critic, all these things come out. I think I just have a different relationship to them to maybe what is kind of out there as the norm.
It's really interesting for me as well, because I think, and if people listening know you, I think they would probably perceive you a bit like I do, as somebody who is actually quite naturally confident from your posts and, you know, your interaction on social, but also if they've attended one of your events. So would we be right in thinking that you're naturally confident? And if you are, where does that natural confidence come from?
Oh, this is great stuff, isn't it? So again, if I go back to one of the things I mentioned before to you, obviously from away from this, is that I don't think I've ever used the word confident when I apply it to myself. So, and I don't really know what that means, but I don't apply it to myself. I don't ever think I'm not confident. I think I'm labeled as confident for sure. Like I think that's always been the case though. And whether that's like a genetic thing, I mean, my dad is very confident. I'm very similar to my dad. So I don't know if it's kind of like a personality's extroverted side that kind of portrays this confidence. But there are, like I said before, there are definitely moments where, and it's funny because I don't see them as not being confident, or I don't go there in my mind when I'm going through those situations. I see them more as, if I think of examples, I see them more as maybe there's like the fear of, like my event, when I launched my first event, you could probably say I wasn't very confident, but I'd never said that to myself. I was fearful that no one was going to show up and I'd be there on my own, you know. But then I did everything I could to turn that round and find these solutions and move forward. So I saw it more of a fear of the unknown than not being confident.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think fear is something that holds us back, but you're right, we don't necessarily relate it to not being confident. Fear, I
Yeah.
mean, God, we could talk about this literally all day. But I think fear holds us back in so many places, doesn't it? Because the fear of the what if, you know, you talked about what ifs earlier as well, and what
Yeah.
ifs are really interesting. And I'm also, and I say this a lot, by the way, that I'm really interested, because usually it is, and it's what keeps me curious, but it's really interesting for me that actually confidence isn't part of your language, yet it's such a big part of everybody's daily life, because we all have confidence, right, to different levels.
Yeah.
And something else before we move on to the next question, something else I just wanted to pick up in there was about, you mentioned about your dad and the behaviors and being quite extroverted. Can an introvert be confident?
I think so.
Mm.
I think they just show it in different ways. And I that's, I think we have to be careful with that, because I think we assume that if you're an introverted, you're not confident. But actually, I don't think that's the case at all. I sometimes think people that are extremely extroverted, you know, are actually doing the showtime piece to cover up some of the insecurities. You know, and maybe that's, and I probably go there as well. Like I put on this extra piece of like showtime because that puts the front on it. It, you know, it covers up some of those worries or insecurities I might have.
Yeah, I always remember working in retail and you all know this because you were in retail too. And on the back of the door before you went onto the shop floor, there was this thing that said, "Smile, you're going on stage."
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like
Yeah.
that, isn't it? You accept almost like you act as if, which, you know, we've talked about quite
Yeah.
a lot as well.
And I think, just touching on that, sorry, I think it's interesting because there's that element of then feeling like you're not being authentic, which obviously is a big buzzword at the moment. But and I try very hard, I'm very conscious of that, to not have this showtime and actually really just be quite open and vulnerable to the situation and be authentic as much as I can, because I'm quite open. Like if someone said to me, like, how did you find your first event, going back to that example, I'm very open to say, like, I was dreading it. I was horrified by the whole idea of it, and like, how was I going to make this happen? So, but obviously when the event happens, you do put on that show because it's happening, and it's, you know, if I was sat on my own, I don't know what would have happened. I would have made it into
Brilliant.
something. I would have had fun on my own, but you know, so I think there is that element of trying to be conscious of that showtime.
And I guess then when you got to the next event, subconsciously you were more confident because you knew people were going to turn up, but you wouldn't have described it like that. You would have had a bit more confidence that people were going to be there.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't ever use the word
No.
confidence. It's really interesting because when you talked about it, I'd never really processed that in my head, that I'd never really used that word. And even when I think about like from a family point of view and how I've brought up, we've never used that word. It's just not something I've heard a lot. Obviously I do now in terms of what's out there, but yeah, and I think, was I more confident for the next event? I think when tickets were getting booked, you feel more like, okay, this is happening. Like, this is real, this is happening. We're doing this, that, and the other.
This is why confidence is such an interesting topic for me, because it means so many different things to different people in so many different forms, and it's important to unpick it a lot, I think, as well. So my next question for you then is, when do you see your confidence at its strongest?
It's at its strongest. I mean, if I've done something, really stupid example would be like driving. When you first start driving, I mean, you could say I wasn't confident at all. Again, I would never use that word, but now I don't even think about it. So I think for me, it's more about the experience or the knowledge you have of something. So when I feel I've done something before and I know I can do it, or like I've almost proven it to myself, then that confidence is at its highest.
And when you don't have that experience and knowledge, how do you draw on your, I want to say confidence levels, but you're now making me not want to use the word confident because you don't use it. So how do you draw on that? I suppose we come back to kind of this belief in yourself then, if we don't want to use the word confidence, where do you get that from? If we're saying, well, actually that confidence feeling comes from experience and knowledge, but if you don't have that.
And I think, again, maybe that's why I don't use the word confident, because for me, that's more of I know from a logical place, I know I don't have that knowledge, so I just have to learn it. That to me isn't confidence. That to me is just a gap in my knowledge. So that's easy to resolve. And I think that's probably how I view a lot of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? What about your confidence or your self-belief then when it's at its lowest?
Then I think I'm very much, I mean, obviously living designedly, working design is all about that sort of self-awareness. And I think I've grown so much and learned so much, especially since having this designedly concept, that's almost triggering me to constantly go back to that self-awareness of like, what are the triggers that cause me to go to that low moment? The moment where I don't have that belief, or where that self-doubt comes in. So I think I understand what triggers it quite quickly now. So I can almost foresee it happening.
Can you share with us what those triggers are? Do you know what they are?
I mean, a lot of the triggers will be, one of the biggest triggers I have is financial security. And even if I have an element of money, that like if I have to go and spend X amount of money on, like, say we're doing some renovation on our house, which obviously everyone knows I'm doing a lot of that at the moment, when we have to pay out a bulk bit of money, even though I know I have financial security, there's that going out of money that triggers me in a very subconscious way. Like I'd never spotted that before, whereas now I can see it. And again, I struggle, and that's probably why it's interesting having this conversation. I don't see that as a confidence thing. I just see that again as a gap. Like there's a gap there, or there's a trigger there that's causing this emotion inside. And that's one of my biggest triggers, like ones I've explored for like loads and loads of times. I'm always looking at that because it happens time and time again.
How do you manage that then?
Well, now it becomes a lot easier. Now I know what the trigger is. I've accepted it, and I'm able to adapt to that, and I'm able to be more aware of it, to kind of go, okay, I see it for what it is. Actually, is then the self-talk, which I suppose comes with it. I mean, hopefully you can tell me a bit more about that. But the self-talk then of like, I have no money, that actually isn't true. So then I go to, well, what are my truths? My truths are X, Y, Z. And that for me is allowing me to spot the trigger quite early, or I can even, if from a money point of view, I know when that's going to happen. So if I know that on the 1st of the month, all my bills come out, does that generally trigger me? Not anymore, because I know it happens and I know how to deal with it.
And what about new triggers then? When you face something for the first time, how aware of those are you?
I think it depends what they are. I think to start with, probably not as aware, because because it's a very subconscious behavior. I think as humans, we're very much into these patterns of behavior, and I love spotting those patterns. So when I do a lot of work with companies and their people, I'm fascinated by people in that aspect. So I think initially maybe not as aware, but I think I go very much on the feeling. Like if somebody's creating a feeling within me, then there's a trigger. And I have to understand where that trigger is coming from. And I think that curiosity, I mean, you're very curious as well, like looking at, okay, why is that happening? What can I do about it?
What are those feelings that you associate with the trigger then?
It can be something as simple as feeling nervous before, one of my first face-to-face workshops recently. It's something I'd done so many times before, and now for the first time in what, a year and a bit, I was going back out to seeing people face to face. That caused an initial feeling of like, oh God, like, can I still remember the way to drive to the car park I park in London? And even this is a really stupid thing, but even when I got to the office building, the lift was different to how normal lifts operate. So instead of going in the lift pressing a button, you had to choose from on the outside of the lift what floor you were going to, which I hadn't seen before, which is stupid, right? So those little things, and that was like, oh, hang on a minute, I don't know what's going on here. And I think that could easily affect your confidence level. Whereas for me, again, it's a new way, and I'm curious to find out, okay, what's next.
Yeah, because I guess sometimes confidence is linked to our routine. So you just described the routine of what you used to do. And, I did something similar, went up to London a while ago to do a first face-to-face in, over a year. And it's like, oh, I think I drove around the car park twice because there were that many spaces. I didn't know where to park my car. But I think if, sometimes that can affect your confidence levels because your routine isn't the same as what you'd expected, and it kind of throws you off. And I guess that's where the self-belief then comes into play a little bit, because you almost have to find out your truths, to use your words of, well, I know I can do this, this is ridiculous, it's just a lift, but I can see how that would really affect somebody if they're in a routine, for them to then go, oh, but this is all going wrong because actually that wasn't the same as I'd expected it to be, and now I'm in a different room, or all of those things. And I guess that's the thing about why it's so different, and also how people think about confidence in their own heads.
And I think as well, like, all those things are external. So going back to my earlier point, I think confidence comes from inside, like from within. And there's all these external factors, like the routine being affected, or like the financial trigger, or even people's opinions and people's judgments. It's all very external. And I've worked really hard to create the separation of that, to go back to my truths from within. Rather than seeing it from the outside, because there's so many people that have opinions, and to me an opinion is just a different point of view. It's just a point of view, doesn't mean it's right or wrong, it's just a point of view. And I think I see it that way now a lot more, and that's really helped me kind of take the external part away.
I think as well, you kind of reference the things that we tell ourselves. So, the inner critic, good old Betty, most of you will have heard me talk about Betty. She's my inner critic, loves to ask me what if, etc. But I think the language that we use to tell ourselves things is really important. And you just said opinion versus point of view. And for me, I would see opinion could be seen as quite conflict, quite it's quite a strong word, isn't it? It's quite opinionated, it's quite a strong word, whereas point of view feels much softer, and that for me, that would be the difference between how I might present something to you to what Betty's telling me. So Betty would be telling me that that's her opinion because she's only sees things in black and white and it's negative, whereas I might project that onto you as, well, actually from my point of view, this is how I would see that, which feels a lot less confrontational. Talk to me about kind of the things that you do tell yourself that aren't good for you.
I find it hard to reflect back on those things. I don't know why that is, but I think I forget the past very, very quickly. I'm a forward mover. So the things I tell myself, the kind of negative side, right? That's what you're saying. I don't remember them. Like,
that's great.
Maybe you can open that box up a little bit, but I don't.
Is that
I'm
a
not
choice?
someone
Is that
who
a conscious choice?
mm,
Because I
I
think
don't
that,
know.
yeah, I think that some people will naturally, I think with an inner critic or an inner voice, whatever we want to call it, I think naturally what happens is it's louder for some people than for others. And I think in some cases, we accept that it's kind of a white noise background and we just let it
Yeah.
kind of happen and wash over us. But some people aren't able to do that as easily. Some people are able to do that, and it's great to hear, and it's really refreshing actually to hear you say, actually I don't remember them, because I certainly will go over and over it and think about it until I'm able to box that off and say, right, I'm over that now, I need to, Betty, you need to shut up and I need to move on. I will think about that, so I do remember them. And again, there's kind of the difference of how I talk about confidence. You talk about it more as kind of a self-belief and my truths. So I think that that's really interesting in the fact you say you just don't remember them, almost like you don't dwell on them because they're not important.
I think that's it. I mean, generally from a personality point of view, obviously we talk about personality types quite a lot. I'm not someone who dwells on things a lot. I might stew on it and I'll go over and over it in my head for about 5 minutes, but I get myself over that point where I kind of rationalize it and then I move on from it. So, and it's not then something I remember, because again, at the time, it's probably just, again, a point of view, that it's situational, like things that have probably triggered those things. So I don't tend to dwell on those. And I just don't remember, like from an instant moment where I think some people could be quite easy to be like, oh yeah, these are the things I say. I can't naturally go there. I'd have to really reflect and go back there.
God,
If it's like an avoidance thing, I just want to avoid all of that.
But maybe sometimes that's what you need to do, and maybe sometimes we could all benefit from being a bit more LDV and doing it in that way, rather than, I probably could take a lesson out of that actually as well. Okay, so talk to me then about how confidence to use, because we are having a confidence conversation, how does it help you in what you do, whether that's an understanding of it or with your clients or even in your living designedly?
So the first bit of that question again.
So how does confidence help you in what you do?
Okay. I think it helps tremendously, because I believe that, and without going into too much detail, like I can really relate to that in the sense of someone I'm very close to or I know very well has zero confidence, but is extremely talented, but isn't reaping the rewards because of their lack of confidence. Whereas some people may look at me and say there isn't a real tangible talent, like I'm not like a musician or incredible graphic design or a gardener, but I have a lot of confidence in other areas. So maybe it's knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at to a point.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that you said there about, somebody that's got loads of talent but lack of confidence. How would you describe that lack of confidence?
In how it shows up, you mean?
Yeah.
So if you were to label it, it would be the introverted, shy, kind of not kind of able to talk highly of their skills, to kind of really big themselves up and be like, I'm really good at this thing. Obviously this is how they show it externally.
Yeah.
Internally there might be a whole different thing going on, but I think kind of being able to present themselves and put themselves out there with these amazing skills that they have, like it seems such a shame because they deserve so much, because they are extremely talented, yet they within themselves are unable to get there.
Yeah. And you also
Shame.
made a link there between almost having a tangible skill. So, you talked about being a gardener, or that was the last thing I think you said, or a musician or something like that, which kind of then links back to the point that we said earlier about having experience and knowledge makes you more confident. And I just wonder if we could just explore that piece a little bit more, because you then said, oh, I don't have any tangible skills, which is not true, by the way. It's not true at all in any stretch. But you're described as confident, yet you then associated someone who isn't confident as having lots of skills.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole whirlwind going on there that I was trying to process in my brain. I think I've always had this thing around and I say tangible, I'm not very good at articulating the exact things, but I see a lot of my skills in the softer skills, not the harder skills. And that for me in the past, and maybe even still a little bit now, causes some elements of maybe it's lack of confidence, self-doubt, or areas of like, well, what am I good at then? If I don't have this hard skill, then that makes that quite difficult. And I've really had to work on, well, I do have strengths. There are things I'm really good at. And I have to, again, that self-belief thing, have to believe in those. But they're not as obvious, or they're not as easy because they're not as tangible.
The tangible thing's really interesting, and I've shared this with you, but I want to share it with everybody, because we were watching one of the football matches. I think it might have been the semi-final, and Harry Kane had scored his third goal, and Guy Mowbray, who was commentating at the time, said, what we're seeing here with this team is the intangible thing called confidence, where things just flow.
There you go.
I had to quickly get my phone out to kind of make a note of what he said, because we've talked about the difference between it being tangible and kind of intangible, and often the confidence thing just comes down to a feeling.
Yeah, and that's really difficult to do something with, because it's a really grey area, and also very different for everybody. Very different.
Absolutely. So just to kind of wrap up then, what top tip or takeaway or anecdote do you want to share with the listeners about confidence, enriching confidence, building confidence? What tip would you share?
I think from and again, this will not be relatable to everybody, because I recognize that my stance on confidence, like I was thinking just now, how is this helpful for anybody when we're trying to talk about confidence, yet I'm not really telling them anything or helping them in any way. But I think if you can, that self-awareness piece of understanding what it is for you as an individual will help you to unravel all of that messiness of confidence, or the messiness of self-doubt and trust, whatever it is for you. I think being able to be very aware of it and accepting of it. I'm very accepting of the things that I'm not so good at, but I'm also very accepting of the things that I am good at. And the triggers, what are they for you? Because again, they'll be very different for different people, and the best way for you as an individual to overcome them. So not worrying about what Bob does, on Instagram, because that works for them. It's like, what works for you? Really figure that out. And it's harder. It's easier to follow someone else's thing. It's much harder to do it for yourself. But I think if you can cut out the noise and go there yourself, live designedly, work designedly, that is, I think, where you find the game changer, the bit that's going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I love that. And this, again, right at the beginning, we said confidence means different things to different people, and that's why it's important to have these conversations about it, because it's one word that means so many different things in so many different forms and shapes. So thank you, Lauren,
Can I ask you something? From someone who deals with confidence all the time, what I'm interested in your perspective looking at it for me, someone that has that, is it a different point of view on it? How do you see that?
I think,
because you're someone who sees it all the time, like you're always talking about it.
Yeah, and I think, look, we know each other reasonably well, and I think I don't think I would describe you as somebody who is confident, but I think you take that from yourself. You don't need external confirmation that you're doing a good job, and actually it wasn't until you said to me, oh, confidence isn't part of my language. I hadn't realized that you hadn't used it. But I think that what I see in you is somebody who knows where they want to go. They know what they want to do. And I think, to go back to your quote when you sent that over to me, completely summed you up in terms of that confidence to you is the belief in yourself and trust in others is something that comes from within. And I think that's right. And I think the saying of, if you believe in yourself, you're halfway there, all of those cheesy
Yes.
quotes are really true, because I do think that confidence is about having trust in yourself. And
Yeah.
if you trust yourself, then you can crack on and do whatever you need to do.
Because I know that obviously you will unpick those things with so many people that you're working with as well. And I think that's fascinating, because even if, as someone who is portrayed as confident, actually we all need elements of that unpicking. Even as someone that is, for me, seen as someone as confident, working with someone like you is really important, because you're increasing that level of awareness, because you're able to articulate and talk about it and open those boxes up, which I think is really key.
Yeah, and also, I the fact that you don't use the word confidence or confident is interesting, but you did talk about the things that are wrapped up in that for me, about the fear of something and the self-talk. All of that is all wrapped up in that little confidence package, and they're things that I unpick and work with all of my clients in some form or another. And for me, that's why it's great to be able to have this platform to be able to discuss confidence, because there'll be somebody out there listening that doesn't use the word confidence in their vocabulary, in their language, but actually they struggle with elements of fear or inner critic, or stepping out of their comfort zone. There's another cheesy phrase, but those kind of things. And that's why I think it's important to use this space to have those conversations with different people, so that if you're listening, that there'll be somebody and something that you will be able to relate to, and know that actually you're not on your own in whatever you're facing with your confidence.
Yeah, because everyone has elements of it in different forms with different contexts.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm not confident all the time. I've got Betty, for goodness sake, who rattles on a lot of the time, and I hear her when I'm going into something that's emotional or vulnerable, or that she perceives to be. So I'm not confident in any situation or every situation. There are things that I quite often say I don't want to do. But and everybody has it. Everybody has it, and that's why it's important to explore it and explore what it really means. So just to wrap up then, where can people find you?
Oh, on all the socials as always. So LinkedIn, Lauren de Vries, or LDV, it should come up. Instagram, there's LDV Works from my business, and then there's LDV Lives, which is me on a personal journey to live designedly. So that's just an ongoing involvement of stuff.
Right, and I'll share Lauren's details in the show notes, I think they call these. So how exciting. I know. And I just want to say that right at the beginning of this, we both kind of said, because this is the first one, and we're like, let's just go with it. We're going to have to do a little bit of kind of let's go with the flow. And we both kind of went, oh, I'm a little bit nervous now. So we've all sometimes just got to pull our big pants up and crack on and do it, haven't we? So thank you, Lauren, for sharing your confidence story. It's been great to talk to you, and thank you for being the first guest.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, there we are, the first episode all done. I really loved talking to LDV and hearing about her confidence and how she manages it. Her takeaway really resonated with me too, about being really self-aware and understanding what confidence really means to you, then being aware of that and truly accepting it. I love that. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed talking about it. I think we could have talked all day. So you can find all of our contact details in the show notes. If you want to get in touch to ask any questions, then please do feel free to do that. That's what, we love talking about this kind of thing. So do go for it and get in touch. And all that remains for me to say is thanks for listening, and hope to see you for episode 2, when I'll be talking to Ali Berry from Ali Berry Photography.